Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Thursday, April 15th, 2021, and today I'm going to be taking a look at the Emily's List target for the 2022 midterm elections. What we're looking at here is 12 governors and senators from around the country that are now on the target list for Emily's List, which is a political action committee we can actually see here on the official Wikipedia page that is main purpose is to elect Democratic women in favor of abortion rights to political office. It's right over here. You can see that they have 3 million people in terms of membership. 2014, they had a $44 million budget. So a pretty heavy amount of influence with one direct goal: expanding abortion rights and making sure that Democratic women in particular are elected to some of these seats that they are currently targeting. And I think that Emily's List certainly is very much just the feminist wing of the Democratic Party. Very well known, very strong in terms of its influence, and I think that it holds a lot of weight in terms of endorsements and in terms of the states that they are targeting. You know, I don't think it's surprising to see some of these Republicans on this list on the target, simply because some of them have been outspoken about them being pro-life or been okay with the idea of abortion laws, restrictive ones, being passed in their states. And I think that this is a very, actually not so long, a very concise target list, to say the least. I'm sure there are plenty of other Republicans that would like to be on notice, as they would put it, but I'm sure that this list is only going to increase. But I want to talk about why some of these candidates might be on here and what we're seeing in terms of the overall state-by-state breakdown in terms of these governors. So main thing here, what you need to notice is that all of these are Republicans. Like you can see in the purpose of Emily's List, you will note that they are focused on electing Democrats, not Republicans. So looking at every single person on here, all 12 of them, they're all registered members of the GOP. And looking at the 2022 midterm elections, all of them just so happen to be up in 2022. Sort of, you can realize why they're being targeted as of today. And I think that there is a reason why some of these states specifically are being targeted. It makes sense. Some of these states are Democratic states with red governors. Some of these states are red states with red governors that are just normally competitive. That it sort of makes sense that they will be under consideration from Emily's List and other Democratic Party political action committees. But overall, we're Democratic Party supporting political action committees. But overall, I think that when you're taking a look at the Senate elections and these governor elections, there aren't really too many that jump out and say, why are they targeting this race? Wouldn't this be a waste of money? Because for most of these cases, I think that it makes sense to be targeting them, or at least starting to form an idea that a Democrat can be elected here in the future, just in the event that this incumbent or some of these incumbents decide to retire after the 2022 midterms or before the 2022 midterm elections. So let's get started with the Senate elections. This is where we are really going to see a lot of money being invested simply because of how close partisan control is currently. We have the Democrats at 50, the Republicans at 50, and what you can see on here is that there are 3 senators that are being targeted. Senator Marco Rubio from Florida, a red state; Senator Chuck Grassley from Iowa, a red state, and when I say red or blue state, that means the 2020 election, and then Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson, who comes from a blue state. And looking at what we saw happen in the previous election here, I'm surprised to see Chuck Grassley on this list, but I think this actually might be a pressure point to have him retire rather than to lose in the 2022 elections. I think that Emily's List is smart. I think that they recognize that certain candidates are always going to win or going to have a very good chance at re-election, Chuck Grassley being one of them, but there's plenty of calls for him to retire, and an endorsement from a major political action committee in the opposition party or on the radar of that. I think that makes it a little bit less feasible and a little less enticing to run for re-election. So Chuck Grassley could actually be seeing a pressure from both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party to retire, simply because the GOP and the Democratic Party knows that if he chooses not to retire or to raise the issue of whether or not he can serve out the full term, or if he chooses to retire, it makes the seat open. All around, Iowa might end up being a win-win scenario, but it won't be this super solid victory for the GOP. which is why, I think Emily's list might actually be targeting it, but I also do think that they recognize that it's still going to be an uphill climb. But this could be a sort of a pressure thing or an optics thing in one way or another. And then the next state is actually the state of Florida. Now, I believe Patrick Murphy was the 2016 Democratic nominee here in Florida. Marco Rubio won by around 7 points in this state. He won by a pretty phenomenal amount, nearly 8 points actually, if you take the overall margins. And that's because he, number one, did better than Donald Trump in Miami-Dade County and in Monroe County and surrounding counties, Broward County. And as a result, he was able to win by a much larger margin. He was popular at the time, a well-known name, someone who had been the third-place candidate in the entire 2016 Republican primary by delegate, despite dropping out earlier than John Kasich. I think that Marco Rubio makes sense to be on this target list because of the state that he comes from, simply because of the 2020 election being narrow. But honestly, I don't expect Florida to be this state that the GOP is going to have a troubling time winning, but I think he's on the target list for a reason because he has been outspoken in the past about being pro-life, and I think that Marco Rubio, at the end of the day, is still a Republican in a swing state, a traditional swing state that could at some point be in a competitive position in 2022 if things start to fall away for him. But I really don't think that's the likeliest scenario, but I can still see why Florida would be on the radar, especially for the governor election. But approval ratings do matter, but things do change leading up to the election. And the final Senate race on here is from the state of Wisconsin. Now, this Wisconsin Senate race went to the Republican Party by a narrower amount than both Iowa and Florida, but it was still a larger margin than Donald Trump in this state. Ron Johnson defeated Russ Feingold, who actually held this seat back before the 2010 midterm elections, and defeated him by 3.4%. Donald Trump won the state by 0.77% for reference. So the margin of victory for Ron Johnson was actually 3 points or 2.8% higher, 2.7% higher than what it was for Donald Trump. But I still think that it was a pretty narrow performance, at least, for what the GOP should be looking at in terms of states that can be viewed as solid or likely for them in 2022. Because a 3.4 or 3.6% margin here, 3.4%, sorry about that, 3.4% margin isn't enough to convince me that the state is going to be very solid for the GOP in 2022. And based off its current characterization and off the idea that Ron Johnson might actually retire, again, the pressure is there on both Chuck Grassley and Ron Johnson. This could also be another type of optics, type of push for him to retire situation to make the race an open seat so the Democratic Party would have a better chance at winning. Just looking at Ron Johnson, it's very possible he decides to retire, and I can see absolutely why this race is on notice, as they would put it. And then for the remaining candidates on here, we all have governors, from Governor Ron DeSantis in the state of Florida all the way to Governor Phil Scott in the state of Vermont. And looking at the 2018 governor election results, you can partially see why Emily's list might want to target some of these incumbent governors. It sort of makes sense for some of them, not for all of them. For example, it sort of makes sense for Ron DeSantis in Florida, given the narrow margin in the past, 0.4%. He's popular now, but we don't know if that's going to change. It makes sense for Kim Reynolds in Iowa. Won here by a margin of 2.8%, not a large margin at all. So that makes sense to be on there. Mike DeWine in Ohio, a margin of a margin of 3.7% for the GOP. Makes sense to be on there. So I'm not surprised to see Florida, Iowa, Ohio on here, just based off of its previous results. But I am sort of surprised to see a state such as Texas on this map when Greg Abbott won by double digits, or Henry McMaster from South Carolina. Yes, he won by 8 points. It was pretty narrow. In fact, James Smith did better than Jamie Harrison in the state of South Carolina in 2020. But looking at the 2016 results and the 2018 results and the 2020 results, it's pretty much been Republican victories all across the board, with some narrowing in 2018, for example. But at the end of the day, South Carolina went to the GOP by 8%. Larger than some states went for the Democratic Party, which makes sense. I mean, it's South Carolina, but 8% is still 8%. Even though it is narrower than usual, it's not to say that Henry McMaster isn't going to do well in the future. So looking at South Carolina, Texas, I think that these are endorsements sort of just against the Republicans that seem to be very much pro-life and not afraid of the pressure from the national GOP to keep such promises. But I am surprised to see Massachusetts Governor Charlie Baker on this list. He's widely popular amongst Democrats as well as Republicans for obvious reasons. Vermont Senator Phil, I don't know why I keep saying senator. I keep thinking we're on the Senate. Governor Phil Scott just won his re-election bid by 40 points in 2020 rather than 15 in 2018 by 40 points. And then we have Chris Sununu, the governor from the state of New Hampshire. 3 Republican governors from very blue states, New Hampshire being the narrowest blue state with a 7-point margin for Joe Biden in the 2020 election. And I sort of understand why it's on the target list, simply because they are blue states with red governors that wouldn't be as much much of an advocate for reproductive rights as a Democratic woman would. But I still am kind of iffy about understanding why this is, because it seems to be a waste of money. Chris Sununu is probably going to run for Senate, so I can see why they would target an eventual open race, but to target Chris Sununu as someone who's mildly popular amongst Democrats, I don't see why that makes sense politically speaking. Charlie Baker and Phil Scott, I really don't see that. Both of these are popular governors, both of which are eligible to run for re-election in 2022. So looking at the list here, and Chris Sununu can as well, but chances are he'll probably jump on the Senate against Maggie Hassan up in New Hampshire. But just looking at these Republicans here, I wouldn't say I'm expecting them to do poorly in 2022. In fact, they might be safe margins for the GOP. I understand that they are Democratic states where Democratic women probably would represent the reproductive movement and the pro-choice movement and, Planned Parenthood protection and everything better than these current governors in terms of obviously priorities. For a Democratic governor versus a Republican governor would be very different, but it's a waste of money. Some of these states are wastes of money. It makes sense to go into Iowa. It makes sense to go in Ohio. It makes sense to go into Florida. They're targeting Georgia as well. Brian Kemp in that list. But some of these states, I'm not really seeing why. I understand the Senate to an extent. I think that a lot of this is just going to be pressure on Chuck Grassley and Ron Johnson to retire. Marco Rubio in Florida probably isn't going to be in for a bumpy ride. He could be, but chances are he won't be. So I think Florida is really the only miss on the governor level. But for Emily's list on notice, 12 candidate spread here, I think it doesn't make sense for them to waste money on Texas or South Carolina. Texas, maybe you can make the argument simply because of the same type of strategy that Stacey Abrams had, which was running local candidates, running statewide candidates. Even if you knew they would lose, you need to give people someone to vote for. I can sort of see that argument for Texas, but South Carolina doesn't make sense to me. But for the rest of them, I'm going to say that they're pretty much right on target. Florida, Georgia, Iowa, Ohio, all close states in the 2018 election. So I sort of see some. I'm kind of iffy about others, but the main takeaway here is that we are starting to see the Democratic PACs run down their list of the Republicans that they want to get out the most. Looking at the NRSC, they have been recently releasing ads and press releases against current Democrats that has given us a very good depiction of who they are going to target, why they are targeting them, and what they are going to target them all. And I think that we are going to see a lot of information from Emily's list and other Democratic political action committees, Democratic supporting political action committees, that will be able to provide us with better context as to what the messaging will be for the Democratic Party and where they are truly targeting. Because what I'm seeing is a spread across the nation that makes sense in some areas and doesn't in others. I think they really just looked at the old election results and ran with it, trying to form their own types of on-target list here. But realistically speaking, some of these races actually might be a little bit out of reach and a waste of money altogether. But again, it's not my money. I'm not going to tell them how to spend it, but I am going to say that it will be criticized simply because I think some of these regions will be unattainable for the Democratic Party or a Democratic woman governor or Senate candidate. But then again, crazier things have happened in 2020 and 2021. So looking at the Senate map here, I can see why Wisconsin's on that target list. I can see why Chuck Grassley is on that target list. I can see why we are seeing other Senate races on the target list here. I believe the final one is the state of Florida. I don't know why I forgot that. Typically, we don't talk about Marco Rubio. If the Democrats do win it, based off of the assumption that they pick up Pennsylvania as well, they will be at 54 Senate seats. Now, I don't think they're going to win Florida. I think that Wisconsin and Iowa is definitely more far-fetched, but Wisconsin sort of makes sense. And on the governorship, looking at the 2018 results and looking at the 2022 map itself, I would not be surprised if Iowa and Ohio flipped in the future, but probably not because of the sole reason that Emily's list is targeting the incumbents here. I think that it really is dependent on how much energy is on both sides, and it looks as if the GOP might have a red wave year if they're able to turn the tides, but as it stands today, I think that the Democratic Party should be going into 2022 cautiously optimistic about their chances in the House, in the Senate, in the governorships. But we're starting to see these political action committees come out in full force and actually start to target some of these states and some of these races, which will kick off a very long and grueling campaign season that is yet to come. And it'll be very fun to watch, very interesting, very exhilarating. There will be a lot of drama, a lot of money, a lot of endorsements, and you should keep your eye out on them. So looking at Emily's list, looking at other political action committees, look at who they endorse, look at what they do, watch their ad spending, look at their fundraising numbers, because this will all matter for 2022. And it's already starting now, and the race for the governorship and for the Senate and the House has already begun, and we're seeing that start yesterday. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 midterm election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.